What's up everyone and welcome back to Reload Reacts. My name is Trey and today we are going to look through r/ProRevenge, the subreddit for those who get back at the ones who wrong them, and are usually quite good at doing it too. This first post is by Yazden. Don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding or this might just happen to you. Last summer, I was at a cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both sides of the family. However, after the ceremony was over and the party had only just started, one of the bridesmaids decided to announce her own engagement. The attention was immediately taken away from the newlyweds and brought to the bridesmaid, who I'll call Sarah, and her equally smug fiancé. My cousin's wife, I'll call her Emma, didn't make a scene or utter a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she kept grinning and acted very happy for the other couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind no matter the consequence. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honor at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there for it, but my cousin sent me some of the best bits on Snapchat and explained the whole situation. This is where the fun begins. Emma's two much younger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the very last moment, Emma switched out the white petals in their baskets to blue ones she had secretly brought with her. She told her sisters not to say anything about it, or let the bride see them until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. Sarah looked very confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't coordinate whatsoever with her theme, but of course she didn't say anything about it in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were also Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on Emma's scheme. At the reception, Emma's sisters and the other bridesmaids were tight-lipped when Sarah began demanding to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner ended up getting a lot of abuse for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen displaying a loop of photos with Sarah and her husband, which had been compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen, and at first, she showed some pre-approved, humorous photos of Sarah with Emma and other friends to facilitate a couple light-hearted jokes. Then, at the very end, Emma said to Sarah that she must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white ones originally planned. That was when Emma displayed the last slide from her presentation. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant, and that she just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals. The last slide, her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I sincerely regret watching the Snapchat recordings with headphones. Apparently, Sarah had been very nasty to her bridesmaids before, driving several of them away and forcing the others to pay ridiculous amounts of money for dresses. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother went to confront her outside, and Emma retorted with, Gentle, I'm pregnant." I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to the majority of those bridesmaids anymore. This next post is by Matchbox. Apple's holier-than-thou attitude is their undoing in court. A few disclosures before we begin. I was an Apple retail employee for 2 years and amicably resigned in favour of full-time post-college employment several months before this unfolded. Additionally, the central issue of this post seems minor. I didn't want to change my password, so some may find this more appropriate for petty revenge. But as it involves an extensive court battle, I think ProRevenge is a better venue. Although the main issue would definitely make me look petty, it was the last straw that broke the camel's back based on Apple's pompousness throughout the issue. About a year and a half ago, I was having issues with both my MacBook and iPhone, and went on to schedule a Genius Bar appointment. This used to be an easy task. You just went to the support site and scheduled one. But over time, Apple has foolishly attempted to reduce the load on Genius Bars by putting up various roadblocks to getting an appointment. I assume Angela has just decided that this is cheaper than hiring more staff, and that most of the customers are rabid enough to still buy Apple tech despite the blow this causes to decent customer service. After finally jumping through a number of hoops to get my Genius Bar appointment, I'm prompted to enter my Apple ID and password. I'm told that since it's been 3 months, I need to change it. For what is now probably the 10th time since having that Apple ID, I can continue to use it on the App Store and iCloud and such, but if I want a service appointment, I must change it. Having gone through this for the last several times to get an appointment, I finally hit my wit's end, decided it's an unnecessary step just to get my products serviced, and escalate the matter through the BBB. Apple's initial response to the BBB is a form letter saying that I need to just change the password because it's in my best interest for security reasons, and that they won't make any exceptions. I respond again, indicating that this is bad customer service and incongruent with the Apple Credo customer service principles that all employees are trained in. Their next response was that Apple considers this matter closed. I hate that response. It's corporate speak for "you're not worth our time anymore, go away." The BBB closed the case shortly after. I do some research and determine that through my Apple Care Plus policy that I was paying for on both devices, there was actually no catch-all clause for why Apple could refuse to service the device. There were several exclusions, but arbitrary account security requirements were not part of them. I file suit in small claims court for replacement value of the laptop and phone. Here's where things got interesting. I show up to the court date, and the case is called. I come up to my podium, and at the defendant's podium appears the manager from the store I used to work at. It was in the same county as the court, but significantly farther away than an Apple store that was actually a mile from the courthouse. I never confirmed this, but I think Apple didn't pay attention to the details of the complaint on the form, just did a name lookup and assumed that because I had previously worked at the store, that this was some employee dispute. The judge asks me to explain why I am suing, and in about a minute I am able to concisely explain that Apple was putting up an unnecessary and extra contractual blockade to getting me a service appointment for my broken devices, so I was suing to replace the devices. The judge then turns to the store manager, who has arrived at court in a t-shirt and jeans. I'm in a full suit out of respect for the court, but before asking for Apple's side of the story, asks if the manager is a lawyer. The manager says he is not. The judge says that my state's laws require that only a chief executive or registered agent can represent a company in court, or they have to hire a lawyer to remove it to a higher district court. The manager responds that he understands, but that he's happy to set up a Genius Bar appointment right here, right now at my convenience to get the products repaired. The judge deems this reasonable. We agree on a time for me to come into my old store for service, and the case is continued for 2 weeks out on the chance that things don't work out. I attend my appointment and the technician is able to resolve all of my issues, and in addition, a senior Apple technician contacts me by email to indicate that he's overridden the password expiration requirement on my Apple ID, and I will never have to change it again. Cool deal, but I'm still out $60 for filing this court case to actually get things moving along. I appeared for the continued court date, and the same manager appears again too. The docket is especially busy on this date, and we have a different judge who is slashing through cases no nonsense. We're called, and I indicate that while we were able to resolve the problems with my equipment since the original trial and am no longer seeking replacement value for my products, I should not have had to sue Apple to get this type of treatment that aligned with their contractual obligations to me as an Apple Care Plus customer, and believe that I should be awarded the $60 in court fees. The judge turns to the store manager and asks if he is a lawyer. Manager says no. Judge 2 gives him the same spiel. Manager retorts that he still believes that the court fees shouldn't be Apple's responsibility because blah blah blah, and judge, pressed for time, turns to me and says, "I assume you don't want to have to come back here again for them to get a lawyer?" I say no, thinking that he's going to give me the full $60, but instead he says, "Okay, then you'll just split it so that we don't have to waste any more time on this. $30 to the plaintiff." According to my state laws, a prevailing party gets all of their court costs. As such, I really disagree with the way the judge handled that, splitting it because he was in such a hurry. I reach out to Apple's paralegal who had emailed me right after the original trial to confirm that Genius Bar appointment, cite the relevant law, and say that the judge was pretty clearly in the wrong, and ask Apple to just cut me a check for the full $60. Otherwise, I'd have to appeal, which was an extra $125, they would surely lose, and then owe me $185. I was more or less appealing to their common sense. They didn't have any, responding that they would follow the court's judgment only and cut a check for $30. I think their pompousness continued in assuming that I was bluffing about the appeal. So, I appealed. Since the small claims court is a subordinate of the district court, it actually got appealed to the highest court in the county, the circuit court. This is the big boy court. No bullessing. I appear for my court date, and again, the same manager shows up. Judge is a bouncy guy in a bow tie, clearly had his coffee and is pleasant to everyone. I present my case that the lower court awarded me partial costs and that the state law requires that I get the entire amount since judgment was entered in my favour. Judge turns to the manager. Are you a lawyer? He says no, but he has a letter from Apple's chief legal counsel saying that it's okay with them that the manager represents them. The judge does not like this and his demeanour changes instantly. Apple does not decide what you can or cannot do in my courtroom. You need an attorney, so we'll probably need to continue this case. Judge turns to me. Do you object to a continuance for the defendant to get an attorney? I say, yes, I do, Your Honour, because they've actually been told 3 times now that they need to have a lawyer, and they keep disrespecting this court by sending the same layman to argue on their behalf. Judge turns to the manager, and with the sarcastic grin and obviously fake it's out of my hands hand gesture says, sorry, judgment is entered in my favour for $185. As if that wasn't good enough, after 30 days, Apple still hasn't paid. I reach out to the paralegal again, and they say that they are still looking into their options, as if they were going to appeal to the state Supreme Court, which had to have been done within those 30 days. Again, Apple thinks that they're too good to follow court instructions or do what's best for them, but they seem to have forgotten that I used to work for them. I have my credit union look up one of the old ACH transactions from my payroll, and I asked them what bank that was drafted from. They tell me Wachovia. I go back to court, file garnishment proceedings against Apple via Wachovia. I was able to skip the discovery portion since I already knew where they were keeping at least $185, and Wachovia of course cuts me a check within days. This is so ridiculous. Apple is not better than the rest of the world. They just need to chill out, follow their instructions. They are not above the law. This next post is by Johnny Provolone. The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked upon in my group of friends even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public, so let's get into this S-storm. Backstory. I was a senior in high school at the time and had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Miss Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless bee who the administrators saw as the golden child. Miss Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Miss Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again. Wow, surprise surprise, you don't understand it again. Really? We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we?" etc. I tried going to the administration about it before, but again she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class, she would act respectful and normal for one day, and go back to being a bee the next. This goes on for about half the year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year and I'm sitting in Miss Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth. She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes in one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present, as well as Miss Franks. He told me we would meet the next day where I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I walk into school the next morning, being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Miss Franks. What follows was some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from being fed up with being in another useless meeting, to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the entire duration of the tape. I also watched Miss Frank go from confident and stuck up to realizing that she had effed up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment. The principal turns to me and says, "I think we've heard everything we need to, thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Miss Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week, and Miss Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Miss Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Miss Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go F yourself. This next post is by Bright Rick. Neighbours kept parking in our parking lot. I froze them out. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 units each. We lived in 2 of them, rented out the other 4. There's nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all have parking. On the side streets are houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units since it was also our home. Since we had parking for around 16 cars, everything was fine for literally decades. Then cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not our tenants. I blocked one in one day. Went outside to see this a-hole, drove through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We'd have to call them to get a car towed. The signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrive home and every space is filled. There are even cars on the street blocking in the other cars. I'm beyond peed. I called the tow company. They can't do anything for a few hours because they are so busy. We're in the Chicago suburbs. It's below 0 out. I have an idea. I dig out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I run one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turn on the hot water. This way the hose and sprinklers won't ice up, but the car and ground sure did. 3 sprinklers moved every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car, every square inch of the parking lot, the street by the cars, encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice in the locks, between the window seals and glass, in the grills, put away the sprinklers and hoses and went to bed. 4 AM, furious pounding on the doors, doorbells ringing non-stop. We just smiled and called the cops, waited until they arrived and went outside. Cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend who owned an apartment several buildings away, the same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission, so all cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get in their vehicle. Wish we had it on video. And I think that's going to be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the stories in r/ProRevenge. Let me know what you'd like to listen to next in the comment section below. And also hit that subscribe button because I post new Reddit content every single day. My name's Trey, this was Reload Reacts, and I will see you in the next video.